It all started innocently enough. Mrs. Bell, my elderly neighbor, asked me to pet sit her golden retriever, Buddy, while she went out of town. I'd known Mrs. Bell for years, and she'd always been friendly, treating me like family. She offered to pay me a small sum to look after Buddy, and since I was saving up, I happily agreed. The first 2 days were as uneventful as expected. Buddy was a lazy, old dog who loved to nap on the couch while I watched TV or read. I'd come over in the evenings, feed him, and keep him company for a few hours before heading home. Everything was peaceful. On the third night, though, something strange happened. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels on the TV, when Buddy suddenly stiffened. He lifted his head and began to growl, a low, rumbling sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. His gaze was fixed on the window across the room, his hackles raised, and I could see his normally gentle eyes narrowed, full of alertness and fear. Heart pounding, I slowly walked over to the window, telling myself it was probably a stray animal outside. But as I peered out, I froze. There, just inches from the glass, was a man's face. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, and staring straight at me with a disturbing intensity. His expression was empty, almost hollow, like he was in some sort of trance. Buddy barked and lunged at the window, and the man finally moved, backing away into the darkness of the yard. I slammed the blinds shut, heart racing, and quickly locked every door and window in the house. I stayed with Buddy for another hour, trying to calm him down and myself, but the feeling of those cold, empty eyes haunted me. The next day, I returned to check on Buddy. Outside the window, I found clear footprints pressed into the dirt. They led away from the house and disappeared into the woods at the edge of the property. I called Mrs. Bell, who was horrified and immediately decided to install security cameras. Days later, she reviewed the footage and called me in shock. The same man had returned multiple times, standing outside the house, staring at the windows. The police were contacted, but they never found him. Mrs. Bell was so disturbed that she ended up moving to be closer to her family. I'll never forget the sight of those eyes, staring at me with that haunting, empty gaze, and I haven't pet sat since. My aunt asked me to pet sit her 3 cats while she was out of town for a couple of nights. Her house was an old Victorian-style home, full of creaky floors, winding staircases, and, of course, a dark, dusty attic. I'd always felt a bit uneasy there, but I brushed it off as just the vibe of an old house. On the first night, I fed the cats and settled down in the guest bedroom to read before bed. The night was quiet until I heard heavy, deliberate footsteps right above me. My blood ran cold because I knew the house had no second floor, just that attic. Trying to rationalize it, I told myself it was probably just the house settling. But as I lay there, the footsteps continued, slowly moving from one end of the attic to the other. I lay completely still, heart pounding, too terrified to move. Then came a scratching sound, like nails scraping along the ceiling above my bed. The noise continued for what felt like hours before finally stopping. I barely slept that night. The next morning, feeling braver in the daylight, I decided to check the attic. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a dusty, stale room filled with old boxes and unused furniture. There was no sign of anything unusual. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but as soon as night fell, the footsteps started up again. This time, they were faster, almost like someone pacing back and forth. I called my aunt, hoping she'd have some logical explanation. After a long pause, she said, "That's why I don't go up there at night. I've heard it too." Her voice was calm, like it was something she'd come to accept, but I felt a chill down my spine. I didn't sleep a wink after that. The next morning, I left her house as soon as I could. Since then, my aunt has admitted to hearing the same footsteps and scratching from the attic, and she refuses to enter it alone. She even tried to sell the house, but potential buyers have reported strange noises too. To this day, no one knows what or who might be pacing around up there. A family friend asked me to pet sit their 2 cats and a bearded dragon named Spike. They were going on a weekend trip and wanted someone to stay overnight since their pets got anxious when left alone. I agreed, thinking it would be easy and even a little fun. The first night was fine. The cats were friendly, and Spike, though strange looking, was harmless. I went to bed feeling relaxed. But on the second night, as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something odd in the hallway mirror, a dark, shadowy figure moving down the hallway. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Both cats were already in the bathroom, staring out at the hallway with wide eyes, as if they'd seen it too. I brushed it off as a trick of the light and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps moving down the hallway, stopping right outside my bedroom door. The door creaked open a few inches, but there was nothing there. Panicked, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But just as I was starting to drift back to sleep, I heard a loud crash from the living room. I rushed out to find that Spike's tank lid had fallen off, lying on the floor like it had been pushed. The cats were hiding under the couch, growling and hissing at something I couldn't see. Terrified, I called a friend and left the house that night. The family laughed it off, saying the house had always had strange vibes and that previous pet sitters had also mentioned odd experiences. They joked that the house might be haunted, but I was sure that what I'd felt and heard was no joke. To this day, I refused to pet sit for them again, and they now handle it themselves. I'll never forget that shadow moving down the hallway and the feeling of being watched by something that seemed to be more than just my imagination.